the night of October 30th, 1503, deep inside the Apostolic Palace of the Vatican, something happened that shook the Christian world in a way few could ever imagine. Under ceilings built to honor heaven itself, 50 unclothed courtesans crawled across freezing marble. Cardinals and bishops stood frozen in place, their silence heavier than the cold air around them. And sitting in the center, watching everything with a smile that did not belong in any holy place, was Pope Alexander VI. He acted as if this twisted scene were his own private celebration, something he had planned for his pleasure alone. Yet what everyone witnessed that night was only the beginning. The true horror had not even started. What followed would be so dark, so brutally against everything sacred, that even the toughest writers in later centuries struggled to record it. This is the story of Lucrezia Borgia, a woman trapped in a family where power was valued above faith, loyalty, or even human life. A woman whose wedding night became one of the darkest stains in Vatican history. If hidden stories of the past fascinate you, subscribe to Grim History, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from once something chills you. Let's begin. In the autumn of 1503, the bells of St. Peter's rang across Rome with news that spread through Italy like wildfire. The Pope had announced that his daughter, twice widowed under circumstances filled with suspicion, would marry again, but this time it would not take place in a distant palace or a quiet noble hall. The wedding would be held inside the Vatican itself, in the papal apartments, beneath sacred frescoes painted to represent heaven's judgment. The man chosen to marry Lucrezia was Alfonso d'Este, young heir to the powerful Duchy of Ferrara. To Italy, the match looked like a brilliant political move, but to Alfonso, it felt like walking toward his own execution. Lucrezia's past was infamous. Her first husband, Giovanni Sforza, had fled Rome claiming assassins were after him. Her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, had been strangled on Vatican steps, with suspicion pointing straight at her brother, Cesare Borgia. And now another Alfonso was being tied to the Borgia family. He knew the danger. Every noble in Italy did. Desperate to escape the fate he sensed approaching, Alfonso tried everything diplomatic excuses, delays, pleas through emissaries. But Pope Alexander VI was not a man who accepted refusal. Inside the Vatican, surrounded by cardinals dressed in scarlet robes, the Pope's authority was absolute. Messengers rode endlessly between Rome and Ferrara with one brutal message: accept this marriage, or be destroyed. If the S family resisted, Ferrara would face Cesare Borgia's ruthless armies. Their dynasty could be crushed, and excommunication would strip them of allies and legitimacy. Everyone in Italy understood what that meant. No one survived a direct conflict with the Borgias, realizing that any refusal would lead to their ruin. Duke Ercole d'Este ordered his son to travel to Rome and submit to the alliance he feared. Meanwhile, in her apartments inside the Vatican, Lucrezia Borgia looked out over the ancient city with a sadness far older than her young age. Across Europe she was painted as a seductress, a poisoner, a woman who used men like game pieces. But those who truly knew her understood the truth. She was not a conspirator, but a pawn caught between a father and brother whose hunger for power devoured everything in their path. Her first marriage had been broken the moment it stopped helping them. Her second husband, whom she had genuinely loved, was murdered before she could save him. Her attendants whispered that she woke at night clutching her chest. Shaking from nightmares, she refused to explain. She knew this third marriage would not bring love or safety. Yet she could not imagine how dark her wedding night would become. Something cruel and carefully planned was gathering behind Vatican walls. Preparations for the event moved quickly, but the palace felt suffocating. Servants avoided eye contact. Cardinals spoke in low, worried tones. Strange men appeared in guarded corridors at odd hours. Rumors spread like smoke, whispered orders, secret guests. Hidden passageways being opened for unknown reasons. One man sensed the weight of it more than anyone, Johann Burchard, the Vatican's master of ceremonies. He had seen many scandals under Alexander VI's lavish feasts, bribery, sacred positions sold as if they were trinkets. But something about this occasion filled him with a quiet dread. He felt deep in his bones that this event would overshadow every scandal he had ever written about. He sensed that history would struggle to describe what was coming. A snare had been set beautiful, polished, and inescapable, and both bride and groom were already walking straight toward its center. In December, Alfonso finally entered Rome with a small escort. His journey from Ferrara had dragged him across frozen mountain paths, muddy roads, and long nights filled with dread that clung to him like a weight he could not lift. But nothing he had imagined prepared him for the sight of the Vatican. It rose above the city like a massive stone giant, half glowing under candlelight, half swallowed by scaffolding. To Alfonso, it did not look like the heart of Christianity. It looked like a fortress designed to devour anyone who dared resist it. Inside, the welcome he received was overwhelming in a way that felt more threatening than warm. Pope Alexander VI sat high upon his throne, dressed in robes of white and gold that reflected the torchlight like molten metal. Beside him stood Cesare Borgia, silent, still, and more frightening than any soldier Alfonso had ever seen. At only 26, Cesare was already feared across Italy. Whole families disappeared at his command. Cities surrendered when he simply approached their gates. When his eyes met Alfonso's, the meaning was unmistakable. You are not a guest here. For the next several weeks, Alfonso was forced to endure humiliation disguised as celebration. At banquets, he was seated beside courtesans while high-ranking clergy smirked behind their hands. During hunts, Cesare showed off a cold, deadly skill that felt less like sport and more like a warning carved into the air. At receptions, Alexander VI made sharp remarks about the tragic ends of Lucrezia's previous husbands, almost as if he were challenging Alfonso to deny the danger he faced. Every smile, every toast, every gesture carried the same silent message: you belong to us now. And yet, none of this compared to what was coming. The true horror of this wedding, the moment history would whisper about. For centuries had not yet begun. There were hunts where Cesare's dominance was displayed with effortless cruelty, each arrow and each fallen animal reminding Alfonso that the Borgias commanded not just armies, but fear itself. There were gatherings where Alexander joked about the short lives of Lucrezia's past husbands, letting those words hang in the air like poison. Alfonso tried to cling to his dignity, but the truth soon became impossible to ignore. He was a prisoner disguised as an honored guest. His nights were spent locked inside Vatican rooms under flimsy excuses, watched constantly by papal guards. Each passing day revealed more clearly that he had stepped into a trap. With no exit, the marriage itself was not the true purpose. It was merely the stage. What the Borgias wanted was something darker, something meant to crush the Este family's pride, humiliate them before all of Italy, and remind every noble house from Florence to Naples that the Borgia power could break any lineage, no matter how ancient or respected. While Alfonso endured this pressure, another kind of preparation was unfolding deep inside the Vatican. Cesare personally planned the wedding night's feast, and his imagination reached depths even Rome's most decadent circles would never speak aloud. Behind closed doors, he met with the Pope to finalize details that would horrify any soul. Who still held the church sacred? 50 of the most admired courtesans in Rome were chosen and taken into secret chambers beneath the palace. These were not simply prostitutes. They were refined women who moved among nobles. Many trembled when they learned what the Pope wanted from them, yet none dared defy the head of Christendom. They were ordered to dress in rich velvet and silk they would later be forced to remove. They were led through hidden tunnels by lantern light so that on the wedding night they could be brought into the papal apartments without warning. Servants, who witnessed even fragments of these preparations, crossed themselves over and over, whispering prayers as if afraid the walls themselves were listening. They felt something unholy rising within the Vatican. Even Lucrezia sensed it. Though she was kept away from most of the planning, she felt the air thicken with tension day by day. Her maids spoke of unfamiliar faces roaming forbidden halls, of courtesans appearing where they should never be, and of Cesare moving about with a smile that made their blood turn cold. The night before the wedding, unable to bear the atmosphere any longer, Lucrezia ran to the Sistine Chapel. Beneath Michelangelo's vast painted heavens, beneath the hand of God reaching for Adam, she fell to her knees and prayed. She did not ask for joy or love. She asked for rescue, any sign that someone or something would save her from what lay ahead. But the chapel stayed silent. The divine felt distant, unreachable, outside. The Vatican prepared for a celebration unlike anything the Church had ever seen one. That would shatter the line between holy ritual and absolute corruption. In his chamber, Johann Burchard, the master of ceremonies, reviewed the final plans. His hand shook as he dipped his quill into ink. He understood better than anyone that what he was preparing to record would either be buried forever or become the most damning document in church history. The night of October 30th, 1503, was approaching, and with it a spectacle that would drag the Vatican closer to darkness than any scandal before it. When the morning of October 30th arrived, it came with all the splendor of a grand papal wedding. The bells of St. Peter's echoed across the 7 hills of Rome. Crowds packed the streets near the Vatican, eager to catch a glimpse of the famous bride. Inside the palace, Lucrezia was prepared by a dozen attendants. She wore a gown of glowing silk embroidered with gold, the fabric shining like liquid fire under candlelight. Her long hair, braided carefully with pearls, fell in beautiful strands over her shoulders. Her face was pale, powdered to hide the exhaustion and fear she could not escape. When she looked into the mirror, she did not see a bride. She saw a sacrifice. The ceremony took place in the papal chapel, a room covered in gilded walls and holy paintings. Pope Alexander VI himself led the marriage, his booming voice filling the sacred hall as he declared Alfonso, and Lucrezia joined before God. Cardinals in brilliant red stood along both sides of the chapel like statues, their faces carved into expressions of strict devotion. Yet behind their calm masks flickered something else fierce. Everyone knew the Borgia reputation. Everyone felt that what they were witnessing was only the beginning. After the ceremony, the guests were escorted into the Borgia apartments. The hallways were decorated with frescoes painted by Pinturicchio, grand scenes of saints and heroes, their stories now darkened by the corruption that filled the air. Enormous tables were ranged for the banquet, loaded with platters of roasted boar, pheasants still wearing their feathers, heaps of exotic fruits, and goblets of wine from the finest vineyards in Italy. Cardinals, Roman nobles, diplomats from Flora, and carefully chosen courtiers filled the room. Alfonso and Lucrezia sat at the head table, trapped in a celebration that felt more like a nightmare hidden behind gold and silk at first. The feast appeared normal. Gentle music floated through the hall from lutes and viols. Guests offered toasts, exchanged empty compliments, and pretended everything was ordinary. But as the night continued, the atmosphere began to change. Alexander VI, flushed from wine, grew louder and more excited. Cesare, who had been silent, finally stood. With only a small tilt of his head, he gave a command. The great doors slammed shut. Guards stepped forward, blocking every exit. No one would be allowed to leave. A cold hush fell over the room. Then the true nightmare began. At Cesare's signal, the side doors opened, and 50 courtesans entered dressed in velvet and jewels, but unable to hide the fear in their eyes. Their steps echoed across the marble as they moved into the center of the hall. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the guards seemed frozen. Then Alexander VI rose from his throne with a wide smile, as if revealing some masterpiece he had long prepared, and announced that the real entertainment of the night was about to begin. At his order, the courtesans slowly removed their fine clothes, letting the velvet and silk fall to the floor until they stood completely naked. Before the entire assembly, the papal hall, a place meant for prayer, now stared at a scene that felt ripped from a nightmare. Some cardinals turned away, their trembling hands tracing desperate crosses over their chests. A few tried to stand and leave, but the guards stepped forward, hands on their sword hilts, making it clear that escape was impossible. Alfonso sat rigid, disbelief and disgust carved into his face. Lucrezia sat beside him shaking, tears running silently down her cheeks, soaking into her wedding gown. Her fingers were locked so tightly together that her knuckles turned white. But this was only the beginning of the darkness. Alexander was not finished. He ordered servants to bring baskets of chestnuts and scatter them across the polished marble floor. The nuts rolled everywhere, echoing softly through the hall. Then he gave a command that stunned even the most hardened guests. The courtesans were to crawl on all fours between the legs of nobles and cardinals, picking up the chestnuts like animals in a contest. Whoever collected the most would receive silk cloaks, gold jewelry, and gifts from the papal treasury. The humiliation that followed was so severe that Johann Burchard later wrote. He struggled to put it into words. 50 naked women crawled across the Vatican floor between the robes of church leaders, while Alexander and Cesare laughed from an elevated platform, pointing and placing bets as if watching a cheap show. Not standing in the heart of Christendom, some younger cardinals, drunk and overwhelmed, cheered without thinking. Others lowered their heads, torn between their faith and their fear of the Pope. Alfonso sat completely still, unable to accept that this nightmare was part of his wedding feast. And Lucrezia, broken and silent, seemed frozen inside herself. She had always known her family was dangerous, but she never imagined her wedding would become a ritual of shame. Yet the night was not done. Midnight was approaching, and the worst was still ahead. As midnight neared and the Vatican clocks struck 12, Alexander finally ended the chestnut game. The courtesans, exhausted and shaken, gathered in the corners clutching their prizes. Wine covered the tables, guests sat stunned and silent, and the air felt heavy with something no one dared name. But the Pope was calm, almost focused. His next order froze the entire hall. He declared that the marriage now had to be proven, not once, but 3 times, and not in private. Everyone present was required to stay and witness that the union between Alfonso and Lucrezia was completed beyond any doubt. The room fell into a deep, horrified silence. Even Cesare, known for his cruelty, looked at his father with surprise. Alfonso rose slowly. The color drained from his face. He had been raised as a prince, taught to honor tradition. But this order shattered everything he believed about dignity and faith. Surrounded by armed guards watching his every move, he knew refusal meant death. He turned toward Lucrezia. She trembled, her eyes empty, her spirit crushed long before this moment. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. With no choice left, Alfonso led her toward a nearby room usually used to receive diplomats, now prepared as a bridal chamber. The doors were left wide open. There was no privacy, no compassion, only a cold stage set for humiliation. Those who remained were forced to stand where they could see everything. What followed was not a marriage. It was the breaking of 2 human souls. Some witnesses whispered prayers. Others cried quietly. Even the courtesans, shaken from their own ordeal, turned away in pity. The Vatican, a place meant to protect the sacred, had become a place of torment when the first and second proofs were completed. Lucrezia slipped into a numb state, her mind separating from the horror she could no longer fight. Alfonso moved stiffly, as if carrying a weight that tore at his very being. Just before dawn, Pope Alexander ordered the 3rd fulfillment. Cesare watched again, cold and emotionless, overseeing everything with the same focus he used on battlefields. When it was finally over, he announced with pride that the marriage was sealed 3 times. Impossible to challenge or undo. Alexander lifted his cup with a satisfied smile. as if the night had been nothing more than a lavish celebration instead of a descent into cruelty. When dawn finally rose over Rome, the damage inside the Vatican was clear. Empty wine jugs lay scattered, chestnuts were crushed into the marble floors, and the exhausted courtesans huddled in corners. Guards stood silently, staring at the ground. In the adjoining chamber, Lucrezia lay motionless, staring upward as if nothing in the room could reach her anymore. Her body was present, but her spirit was far away. Alfonso sat at the edge of the bed, trembling, his face hidden in his hands. Nothing in his life, no war, no threat had ever broken him like this night. He knew there was no revenge powerful enough to restore what had been taken from him. A few days later, he left Rome quietly, returning to Ferrara with a silence that stayed with him for the rest of his life. He never spoke of the night again. But the story spread anyway. Whispers turned into rumors, and rumors turned into letters sent across Europe. Ambassadors wrote secret reports. Priests warned their followers. Nobles read the accounts in shock. The Venetian envoy famously wrote that what happened surpassed even the darkest imaginations of ancient Rome. Across Europe, the Borgias became symbols of corruption far beyond fear or politics. Johann Burchard recorded the entire event in his diary, his hands shaking as he wrote. He knew the Vatican might try to erase everything, yet he wrote anyway, aware this could become the most condemning testimony in church history. Lucrezia eventually settled in Ferrara, trying to build a peaceful life. She supported artists, funded charities, and raised children. But those who met her privately noticed the same quiet sadness in her eyes, a sorrow that never left. Her marriage with Alfonso continued, but the wound from that night left a distance between them that no love or effort could bridge. She died at only 39 while giving birth, whispering that she was finally ready to be free. Alexander VI died months after the wedding feast. Rumors saying poison the tool he used so often had returned to him. Cesare lost his power and later died violently in Spain, buried in an unmarked grave. But the night of October 30th did not die with them. It became a symbol of absolute power gone rotten, a story that helped fuel the Protestant Reformation. Burchard's diary later resurfaced, pulling the event back into the light. Even today, the Chestnut Banquet and the triple humiliation remain warnings of what happens when silence protects evil. If you reached the end, write boo in the comments to show you walked through this dark history with us.